Welcome to the Big Blue Breakdown as we take a look at the three key matchups to watch for the New York Giants Sunday night game at MetLife Stadium against the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm Paul Dottino. All right, so we know the Giants overcame some significant injuries. They did not have Devin Singletary or Malik Nabers in their win over the Seattle Seahawks last Sunday as they got to 2-3 on the season. But can they keep it going now against Cincinnati? Well, the Bengals are off to a horrible 1-4 start, but we'll talk more about the state of Cincinnati in just a minute. Let's look at the state of the Giants. Now, the injury picture during the course of this week, not a whole lot rosier. For example, Malik Nabers has been in concussion protocol all week as we talk to you here on Friday morning. You'd have to think that it's highly unlikely he's going to be able to make it this week. So we're probably looking at Darius Slayton becoming the key X receiver in the offense again against Cincinnati. Nothing wrong with that. Slayton had a big game already against Seattle. Breakout game for him this year. We'll see if he can keep it going. Kayvon Thibodeaux. If you didn't hear it on Wednesday morning, yeah, he did have surgery on his wrist. Head coach Brian Daboll says he is week to week. So I don't think that sounds much like there's a lot of optimism for him to be there this weekend. Which means that Azeez Ojulari, who, by the way, has been playing the fewest percentage of snaps during the course of this season, since he came to the Giants some years ago. But he's been healthy. And maybe that's part of the reason he's healthy, is that they've reduced his workload. Well, now they've got to count on him for potentially a full workload as he plays opposite Brian Burns. And so it's good that Ojulari's healthy. It's good that he's a lot smarter than he was when he came into the league because he's got the experience and the guile now to understand more about what the NFL's about. And we're going to see if Ojulari can have a really breakout game here in 2024 because Thibodeaux is going to be down. Also, Bryce Ford-Wheaton came down with a sore shoulder apparently out of that game in Seattle because he was unable to practice on Thursday. He's been a big part of special teams this year in the coverage units. I mean, heck, on the blocked field goal that Isaiah Simmons had to preserve the win against Seattle, it was Ford-Wheaton who picked the ball up and raced 60 yards for the clinching touchdown in the final minute. So that's going to probably have a significant impact on what the Giants do with their inactive list and what they do looking at practice squad activations, because special teams are definitely a big part of what the Giants are trying to do each and every weekend. So that's going to be a very interesting scenario to see how they decide to handle that. I would expect, because of Thibodeaux being down and maybe Ford-Wheaton being down, it's very likely you'll see Tamon Fox, linebacker, outside linebacker, probably be one of the activations this weekend. Also, starting left guard Jon Runyan, he's been ill most of the week. So even if he's able to start and play against Cincinnati, what's his conditioning like? How many snaps is he going to be able to give the Giants if he's been laid up being ill all week? So Aaron Stinney, the veteran free agent signed in the offseason from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he had a good training camp. And one would think that Stinney's going to be ready to step in there if the Giants need him. Joshua Ezeudu, of course, is also available should the Giants need some snaps at guard. So that's kind of the state of the Giants right now. Devin Singletary, by the way, don't want to leave him out. Remember, because of the sore groin, did not play in Seattle. He has been ramping up and is very optimistic about being able to give the Giants at least some snaps against the Bengals. All right. Real quick note that we can't ignore, and that is the Giants' record on Sunday Night Football. I know so many of these historical numbers don't mean a whole hill of beans, but I'm sure you folks feel it, right? The Giants on Sunday Night Football are 23-33-1 since the inception of the game, and 11-4 at 11-14 at home. But of course, in more recent times, it's been even a tougher go. In the previous 10 years coming into this season's schedule, the Giants are 4-10 on Sunday Night Football. It has not been a pretty time for this team, and I don't know. Is there a common thread? Seriously, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody does. But certainly in recent vintage, the Giants' offense has had even more trouble than they've had in the daytime when they play in prime time. And some of these games have been, quite frankly, very lopsided. Giants need to turn that around if they're going to beat the Bengals on Sunday because, hey, they're going to have to score. Cincinnati's offense is incredibly potent, and they're not going to make it easy on the Giants. That I can guarantee you. All right, the state of Cincinnati. Starting corner Dax Hill, who is their best cover guy, tore his ACL last week. He's out for the season. That is a significant issue for the Bengals, and we'll talk about it more during our key matchups to watch in the next segment. They are 1-4, as we mentioned, the Bengals. They come off an overtime loss, 41-38, against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, look, it doesn't take a genius to know what's wrong with the Bengals this year. Their defense has really, really struggled. And for anybody who knows Lou Anarumo, the former Giants secondary coach, who was the defensive coordinator in Cincinnati, he's a really smart football guy and has done a great job the last few years of orchestrating the Bengals defense. But this year, combination of not maybe investing enough of resources into that side of the ball, plus a couple of injuries, it's just been a really rough go. Now, injury-wise, let's start with this. Besides Dax Hill, it's a two-man backfield for the Bengals. They go with Zach Moss, the former Buffalo Bill, and Chase Brown. They're a two-headed running back system, basically, that carries the rock. Moss is dealing with a foot injury, Brown with a sore quad. Both have been limited during the course of practice this week, which is really very interesting because that would make them, probably more heavily rely on the pass. Well, is that a bad thing when you have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Mike Gesicki, and Joe Burrow throwing to them? Not necessarily. But we at least have to inform you of this fact. In fact, Brown, I might add, was also averaging 5.5 yards a carry, which puts him ninth in the National Football League among qualifying rushers. So he has been even more effective than Moss during the early part of this season. All right. To talk about the overview on how the Bengals have performed, they are tied for fourth in the NFL, scoring 28 points a game, and quarterback Joe Burrow, to no one's surprise, is having another terrific season. After all, the only thing that seems to really stop him are injuries. He's in the top 3 in the NFL in touchdown passes, completions, yardage, and completion percentage. Now, the one thing that has hampered him is that the Bengals have allowed 11 sacks so far this year, and in 3 of their first 5 games, he has been sacked 3 times. So 9 of the 11 sacks coming in 3 of the 5 games. The Giants, I might add, lead the National Football League with 22 sacks. And by the way, Kayvon Thibodeaux, who again is not expected to play, only has 2 of them. It is Dexter Lawrence leading the way with 6 sacks after compiling 3 last weekend against the Seahawks. All right, so we know that the Bengals want to lean on Burrow, and we know that his offensive line hasn't exactly played as well as they need to. Now, it is interesting to note that it's been a leaky line, but no one guy in particular has been the culprit. In fact, they don't have a single offensive lineman who's been responsible for more than 1.5 sacks on the season, even though they've given up 11, which kind of tells you that there have been many leaks up and down the line from left to right. It's not just one guy that you can concentrate on and say, well, he's been the sieve. We look at the targets, and it all starts, of course, with Ja'Marr Chase, a couple of 100-yard games. We know that T. Higgins is also as good as they come at fighting for the 50-50 ball. Interesting about Higgins, because I'm going to talk more about Chase in the key matchup segment. Higgins, 18 receptions for only 182 yards. So that's a career low for him in terms of averaging only about 10 yards a catch. He is a much more dangerous receiver than that, but Burrow's had to get the ball out quickly. And Higgins has been his primary short target as they deal with the quick passing game, being that he's not having a lot of time to get back and set up on 5-step drops. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Adoree Jackson wants to play Higgins, who has not been getting deep in his routes due to the pass rush. On defense, there's no question. It always will start with Trey Hendrickson, their right defensive end. On the season, the Bengals only have 8 sacks. It has really been a tough go for them. In fact, in looking at their number, I'm sorry, let me correct myself, 6 sacks. They're tied for 29th in the league with 6 quarterback sacks defensively. Misread the number. They have 24 quarterback hits. And Hendrickson has 3 of the sacks and 7 of the quarterback hits for this Bengals defense. All right, we'll take a quick short break, and in just a second, we will come right back with our 3 key matchups to watch as the Giants prepare to take on the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday Night Football at MetLife Stadium. All right, the 3 key matchups to watch, well, you're probably not going to be a whole lot surprised based on what we already told you in the first segment. We're going to start with the Dax Hill injury because that's a big one for the Bengals. They're looking at Cam Taylor-Britt primarily playing right cornerback against the Giants' ex-receiver. Now, Taylor-Britt, according to the statistical analysis, has allowed 16 completions on 26 targets this year for 314 yards and 3 touchdowns. If you go back and watch the film, you'll find out that he has given up touchdown passes of 44 and 21 yards amongst those 3 scores. So he has been beaten downfield. Well, that stands to reason when you consider the 16 completions and the 314 yards means he's given up nearly 20 yards a catch, which is an outrageous number. Now, Slayton, Darius Slayton for the Giants, has averaged 15 yards a catch for his career. In fact, he's one of only a handful of NFL players who has averaged 15 yards or more per reception since Slayton came into the league. He has been very underrated in terms of his ability to get vertical. Slayton last week against Seattle, without Malik Nabers in the lineup, became the Giants' go-to guy. Daniel Jones has always favored him anyway, but he was the comfort zone against the Seahawks. Caught 8 passes for 121 yards and a touchdown. It's the 6th time in Slayton's career now he's caught at least 100 yards worth of passes in a single game. I would think that Slayton against Taylor-Britt is definitely going to be a matchup that the Giants would like to exploit as much as possible. So I'm going to list that as my first key matchup to watch in this weekend's game. The second key matchup to watch, well, we're going to flip it to the other side of the Bengals roster, and we're going to look at their defense. Trey Hendrickson, who has been one of the league's better pass rushers in the last few years, we mentioned the 3 sacks and the 7 quarterback hits. He's tied for 7th in the NFL with 23 pressures. Now, Hendrickson, unlike some of the other top pass rushers in this league who move around a lot, does not really do a bunch of that. You usually will find him in his defensive end position on the right side of the Bengals unit. In fact, 94% of his snaps have come from the right defensive end spot, lining up against the opposing team's left tackle. So we're going to go with Giants left tackle Andrew Thomas against Trey Hendrickson, a guy who over his career has shown that he can wreck games. And you don't want to let a big player like Hendrickson make big plays against you. Now, Thomas, this is a very interesting dynamic that I've got to bring up here because Next Gen Stats says he's allowed 18 pressures through the first 5 weeks of the Giants season. They've also got him down for allowing 4 sacks. Now, that's interesting because how do you grade sacks allowed? I don't have Thomas for allowing any sacks on my unofficial chart that I keep because if you were to look at those sacks, it was not because Thomas flat out got beat. What happened was Jones either held the ball too long. Remember, it's unreasonable to expect an offensive lineman to execute his block for 4 seconds. You know, once the quarterback has 2.5 to 3 seconds to throw the ball, and if he holds it, it's a coverage sack or it's on the quarterback for holding the ball too long. So given a reasonable amount of time for a tackle to hold up his defender, I've looked at the sacks that have been discussed about regarding Thomas, and I don't see him being finger pointed, at least in my eyewitness account, for any sacks. I saw Jones either scrambling into what was ruled a sack or stepping up, holding the ball too long. In fact, there were 2 sacks by the Minnesota Vikings opening day that fit the step up into the pocket, holding the ball too long, and wound up getting charged to Thomas by some of your statistical gurus who do keep track of these things. I tend to peel the onion back a little further, and I don't necessarily always charge sacks to an offensive lineman. I think you can charge a team sack, and you can charge a quarterback for being responsible for a sack as well. So that's how I see it. Thomas against Hendrickson, key matchup number 2 to watch in this game. Key matchup number 3 to watch. How could it not involve Ja'Marr Chase? He is as potent as they come, and we go back to checking out some of his numbers. 29 receptions, tied for 8th in the NFL. 493 receiving yards, that's good enough for 2nd in the league. Averaging 17 yards a catch, that's 9th in the league. Tied for 1st in the NFL with 5 touchdown receptions, of course. Had a 70-yard wide receiver screen that went for a touchdown against the Ravens last week. Tied for the 5th longest pass play in the NFL this season. And oh, by the way, just for good measure, we'll throw icing on the cake here. Ja'Marr Chase leads the NFL with 241 yards after the catch. Yes, indeed. He and Jefferson from the Vikings are easily the 2 premier wide receivers in the game today. Make them 1-2 or 2-1, however you like. But they are the most potent receiving weapons in the league. Now, Chase does go in motion 14% of the time, so he won't always be stationary as the X-receiver in the Bengals scheme. They will move him some and try to get him around. The Giants, well, are they going to put right corner Deonte Banks on him and lock him down? That remains to be seen. An awful lot of the time, in fact, most of the time, opposing teams have simply doubled Chase. They haven't stuck their best guy on him to shadow him. Most teams have simply said, we're just going to put two guys on you because you're that good. I don't know what the Giants will do, but I will say this. Tay Banks has only played 10 snaps in the slot this year. So if the Bengals decide to slide Chase in there, it's rather unlikely that Banks is going to follow him. Last week, Banks had his breakout game. He had a game typical of a number one corner in this league. 3 passes defensed, a forced fumble, and by my count, only allowed 2 completions for 21 yards in man coverage. It was an elite-type performance. And we'll see if Banks can continue what he did to DK Metcalf of Seattle against Cincinnati's Ja'Marr Chase. And by the way, we should mention, Banks very physical for his position. Sports Radar, which tracks missed tackles for NFL teams, has no missed tackles for Tay Banks this season. You definitely do not want to miss tackles against Ja'Marr Chase, who is the yards after catch leader, as we just told you a couple of moments ago. So those are my 3 key matchups to watch for the New York Giants in their Sunday night football game against the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll be back on Monday morning with the Big Blue breakdown, game balls and gassers, as we sort through the best plays and the zonkers on the Giants' offense, defense, and special teams. That'll do it for this edition of the Big Blue Breakdown. Again, we will see you then. So long, everybody.